here is where, I am skeptical about the military option deeply, and I actually think it will be quite counterproductive. So certainly the US has the capacity to bomb some labs. Now, many labs are no longer in the mountains. They will be in urban spaces. There are, of course, big risks of killing civilians, and not just through the impact of the explosion, but if fentanyl is released, you can kill people through the spread of the chemicals. So, you cannot be killing many Mexican people in this way.
Yeah.
And you can do high-value targeting by special operations forces against some of the famous narco leaders. But they have been doing that, or not the US directly, but the Mexican government through US support and instigation has been doing that since the Calderon era. Even the AMLO people would every so often arrest someone like Ovidio and hand it over to us. What we really need is a much more sustained joint effort that targets the entire structure of the criminal organization. That is not just this one-off odd bust labs here, odd lab busted here, odd high-value criminal targeted. The replenishment capacity to generate leadership has been extraordinary. You have scores and scores of actors being taken from the top leaderships of the groups, and it leads to fragmentation, infighting, but also just resurrection of new structures. And so I think that we have an opportunity to define US-Mexico collaboration in a way that recognizes the need of Mexico to reduce violence, that helps Mexico recover sovereignty, and that does it in a way that is sustainable bilaterally. The AMLO era, when the narcos were given the carte blanche, was a bad era. And the US law enforcement was completely in the freezer at the time. We don't want to be in that position. If we send special operations forces to arrest some high-value target, say Alfredo, he's one of the Chapitos, well, the Mexican government will completely kick us out. We can unilaterally breach the border so many times, but the payoff is very limited in terms of the impact on the trade and the cartels, and the costs are enormously high for the bilateral relationship. Instead, what we should be asking is to go back to where we were during the Calderon era, where we had vast numbers of US law enforcement agents across Mexico being able to be part of on-the-ground operations, at least in an observer role, being able to be part of joint fusion intelligence centers, so that we also have eyes and can prompt some of the necessary cleanup of law enforcement and military institutions in Mexico. This is a very hard task. The Mexican government doesn't want it. But this is what I would be focusing my diplomacy on, not the satisfaction of a missile strike, but on bringing US law enforcement back in a sustainable way to Mexico, and telling the Mexican government, this is not just for us. This is not only a payoff for tariffs. This is in the interest of your state, your people.
In your 20 years of living among and looking into these illicit markets, what's the most effective thing that you have seen that actually changed the trajectory in these markets? Has there been any one thing or a few things that have worked?
In terms of policy?
In terms of policy or even actions. I mean, I've been hearing about the war on drugs since I was literally a child. And we certainly keep pumping money into it. And, I think the jury is probably not out anymore as to whether or not it has been incredibly effective. And I'm just curious, in your experience, what have you seen that has actually worked?
So we need to kind of get, I think, below what are the objectives that we're trying to achieve. And I would outline several objectives. One is we want to save lives. So we don't want people to be dying from overdose, and we don't want their lives to be ruined by using drugs. Many people who use drugs will use drugs without having adverse effect on their health or on their social life, on their employment capacities, on their family life. But some 20% will develop a chronic illness that will be enormously destructive to their lives and the lives of their families. We want that number to be as low as possible. So what we for sure know that doesn't work is imprisoning users. Doesn't help anything. Imprisoning dealers, non-violent dealers, doesn't really help anything very much either. So what works is getting people access to medically sound, evidence-based treatment. So why are we having the overdose deaths finally going down? Narcan, buprenorphine, access to medication, access to medical insurance that allows people to have access to medication. People often say, well, why don't you just reduce demand? Reducing demand is actually really, really hard. But there are many components to reducing demand, one of which is being able to get people to treatment. That means being able to get insurance for people to have treatment.
I'm going to add as well, something I've heard from my law enforcement friends, testing kits, people's ability to actually test what it is that they think they're using. It's
not all users will do it, but
correct. But it's a tool. It is a tool. At least you know what you're getting into, or don't.
Exactly. So I think so. Much sounder and expansive approach to treatment. Along with that comes something that has long been very taboo in the US, harm reduction. This would be things like testing kits. This falls under the rubric of harm reduction, and for a long time, US policy was deadly opposed to it. On the law enforcement side, there are law enforcement really important gains and successes of law enforcement. What hasn't worked is stopping the supply. Maybe we are now in a situation where there is some reduction in supply. Maybe the supply that's being sent is less pure. What has worked in Western countries, however, and for that matter in East Asian countries with very brutal and excessive law enforcement, in my view, is reducing violence. So just back to the Mexico-US contrast, Mexican cartels, very violent in Mexico, including in legal economies, very nonviolent in the US. So we need to preserve that core focus of law enforcement, of tempering down the behavior. You can smuggle contraband that's bad. You smuggle contraband that results in deaths, whether it's because it's so potent or because you are so violent, then we will smash you. So I think having this nuanced picture of where law enforcement comes in is an important element of how to get better results.